Imagine a map of North America, but something's different. The familiar border between the US and Canada? Gone, vanished, replaced by a seamless expanse of states, stretching from the Gulf of Mexico all the way to the Arctic Ocean. What if Canada, America's friendly neighbor to the north, actually became the 51st state? And if it did, what would it look like? We're not talking about an invasion here. This is about a voluntary democratic union, a merger of two distinct national identities, economies, and political systems. A process that would make Brexit look like a minor disagreement. The idea of closer ties between the US and Canada isn't new. There have been whispers of annexation, free trade agreements that blurred the lines, and even moments in history where a union seemed plausible. But this isn't about history, it's about the future. A hypothetical future, sure, but one we can explore with real-world data, political analysis, and a healthy dose of what if. Let's be clear, the odds are stacked against this, enormously. For Canada to become the 51st state, you'd need a perfect storm of political will, public support, and economic incentives on both sides of the border. And that's a very tall order. But let's entertain this. We're not just talking about hypothetical global crises anymore. The political landscape is shifting, and rapidly.
You were considering military force to acquire Panama and Greenland. Are you also considering military force to annex and acquire Canada?
No, economic force. Because Canada and the United States, that would really be something.
Dismissed by many as mere rhetoric, have undeniably injected the idea into the mainstream conversation. We're seeing the initial spark happen in real time. Remember his February 2025 remarks, calling the US-Canada border an artificial dividing line?
You get rid of that artificially drawn line, and you take a look at what that looks like. And it would also be much better for national security. Don't forget, we basically protect Canada.
Or his pointed reference to then Prime Minister Justin Trudeau as Governor Justin Trudeau?
And I said that to, as I called him, Governor Trudeau. I said, listen, what would happen if we didn't subsidize you, if we didn't, because we give them a lot of money.
And let's not forget the near universal tariffs he imposed on Canadian goods, citing national security, a justification Canadian officials have vehemently refuted, with former Prime Minister Trudeau even calling it an attempt to collapse the Canadian economy. These aren't just offhand comments, they're a calculated strategy, a way of testing the waters, of normalizing a concept that was once confined to the fringes of political discourse. He's essentially bypassing the traditional Joint Commission stage and going straight for the public opinion battleground. And it's having an effect. While a March 2025 Angus Reid poll showed that a vast majority, 90% of Canadians reject the idea, a surprising 21% of Conservative Party supporters would vote yes in a referendum, and that number climbs to 33% if the Liberals win another majority. On the US side, while 60% express no interest, a significant 42% of Trump voters are open to it if Canadians were on board. So instead of a slow, deliberate process, imagine a more Trumpian scenario. It might not be a global economic crisis, but a manufactured one. The ongoing trade war, with Trump's aggressive tariffs, could be deliberately escalated, creating economic instability in Canada and pushing some Canadians to consider, however reluctantly, the idea of a merger as a way to escape the economic pressure. The initial spark in this case wouldn't be diplomatic overtures. It would be a barrage of tweets, rallies, and provocative statements. Think, Canada's great, amazing people, but their leaders are weak. They can't handle the pressure. Maybe they'd be better off with us. No more tariffs. Best deal ever. This wouldn't be a gradual shift in public opinion.
How do you guys feel about Canada potentially becoming the 51st state?
51st state, why not? I think it'd be a good thing.
You think Trudeau is scared of Donald Trump?
I think so, yeah.
Some of Trump's ideas, I hate to say it, are actually not bad.
It would be a shock and awe campaign designed to exploit existing divisions and anxieties. The media, on both sides, would be in a constant state of frenzy. Social media? A complete and utter meltdown, with disinformation campaigns running rampant. If, against all odds, this aggressive approach did manage to sway public opinion, and that's a huge if, the next stage wouldn't be calm, measured negotiations. Forget teams of diplomats meticulously hashing out details. Think high-stakes televised summits between Trump and the newly appointed Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney, filled with characteristic Trumpian bluster, threats, arm-twisting, and perhaps, surprisingly, some genuinely appealing offers. designed to sweeten the deal for a skeptical Canadian public. Then there's the legal framework. Both countries have complex legal systems. The US Constitution would need amending, and Canada's Constitution Act would require significant revisions. This would involve lengthy legal battles and potential constitutional challenges. Ultimately, it would come down to a vote. In Canada, this would likely involve a nationwide referendum, possibly requiring approval from each province. In the US, it would require a constitutional amendment, which means a two-thirds vote in both the House of Representatives and the Senate, followed by ratification by 3/4 of the state legislatures. That's the simplified version. The reality would be infinitely more complex. Canada and the US have two of the largest economies in the world, deeply intertwined yet distinct. Merging them would be like combining two massive corporations, each with its own complex accounting systems, supply chains, and regulatory frameworks. The most immediate issue? Currency. The most likely scenario? A phased adoption of the US dollar. Typically, every Canadian dollar would be bought out at the current USD to CAD exchange rate, a process that would need careful management to avoid inflation, market instability, and economic shocks. Imagine the logistical challenge of replacing every single Canadian bill and coin. However, in a Trumpian art of the deal scenario, there's another, far more radical possibility: a one-to-one swap. One Canadian dollar becoming one US dollar, regardless of the actual exchange rate. Given the USD to CAD exchange rate as of late March 2025, with the Canadian dollar significantly weaker, this would represent a premium of over 40% for Canadian dollar holders, a massive and incredibly expensive incentive designed to sway Canadian public opinion. This is financially improbable and highly unrealistic, but in a Trump scenario where showmanship trumps fiscal responsibility, it's within the realm of possibility. Now, let's get into the heart of the matter: politics. Canada's parliamentary system is fundamentally different from the US's presidential system. Integrating Canada into the US political framework would be a monumental challenge. But first, a quick primer on US politics for our Canadian viewers, and a refresher for the Americans. The US government is divided into three branches: the executive, that is, the president; the legislative, which is Congress; and the judicial, the Supreme Court. Each branch has its own powers and responsibilities, and they're designed to check and balance each other. Congress is made up of two houses, the House of Representatives and the Senate. Representation in the House is based on population. Each state gets a certain number of representatives based on its population size. In the Senate, each state gets 2 senators, regardless of population. This gives smaller states more power in the Senate. For a bill to become law, it must pass both the House and the Senate, and then be signed by the President. This process can be lengthy and complex, often involving negotiations, compromises, and political maneuvering. The President isn't directly elected by popular vote. Instead, they're elected by the Electoral College, a system where each state gets a certain number of electors based on its population. This system has been controversial, as it's possible for a candidate to win the popular vote but lose the election. So, how would Canada fit into this system? This is where things get really interesting. Based on Canada's current population, around 40 million, it would likely gain a significant number of seats in the House of Representatives. Estimates suggest Canada could gain around 40 to 50 seats, making it a major player in the House. This would shift the balance of power in Congress, potentially giving Canadian issues a much larger voice. This is where it gets tricky with the Senate. If each former Canadian province became a state, that would mean 20 new senators, 10 provinces times 2 senators each. This would dramatically alter the composition of the Senate, giving the former Canadian provinces significant power. This is likely to be a major sticking point for existing U.S. states, particularly smaller ones, who would see their influence diluted. A possible compromise? Perhaps some larger provinces, like Ontario and Quebec, would become multiple states, while smaller provinces would be grouped together. This would be a fiercely debated issue. The addition of Canadian electoral votes would also change the dynamics of presidential elections. The Canadian vote could become a crucial swing vote, making presidential candidates pay much closer attention to issues important to former Canadians. Would Canada's existing political parties, Liberal, Conservative, NDP, merge with the U.S. parties, Democrat, Republican, or would they form new parties or remain independent? This would create a whole new political landscape in the U.S. The U.S. Supreme Court would also need to weigh in, interpret laws, decide how they are applied, and even determine if existing Canadian laws are constitutional. The integration of Canada into the U.S. political system would be a period of significant adjustment, with potential for both cooperation and conflict. Let's imagine the merger actually happens. The votes are tallied, the legal hurdles are cleared, and Canada is officially the 51st state, or multiple states. What would life look like in this new North America? This is perhaps the biggest question. Would Canadians retain their distinct cultural identity? Would they become Americanized? Or would the merger lead to a new blended North American identity? This would be a long and complex process, with potential for both assimilation and the preservation of cultural traditions. The French-speaking population of Quebec, for example, may want to protect its cultural and linguistic heritage. Canada's social safety net, including its universal healthcare system, is significantly different from the U.S. system. How would these systems be integrated? Would the U.S. adopt a more Canadian-style healthcare system? Or would the former Canadian provinces have to adapt to the U.S. model? This would be a major point of contention. Canada and the U.S. already have a close defense relationship, but a full merger would mean a unified military. This would create a military superpower, but it would also raise questions about Canada's traditional role as a peacekeeper and its more cautious approach to foreign intervention. Integrating infrastructure, from roads and railways to power grids, would be a massive undertaking. It would require significant investment and could create new economic opportunities. Would Tim Hortons become as ubiquitous as Starbucks? Would become a common American phrase? The small, everyday changes would be just as significant as the big political and economic ones. To expand on that cultural point a bit further, think about language. While English is the dominant language in both countries, French has official status in Canada. Would this continue in a merged nation? Would the U.S. become officially bilingual? This could have significant implications for education, government services, and public life. Quebec, in particular, with its distinct francophone culture, would likely demand strong protections for its language and cultural heritage. This could lead to unique arrangements within the new union, potentially granting Quebec a special status with greater autonomy over its language and cultural policies. The education system would need to change also. The curriculum would need to be adjusted. No longer would Canadian children be learning about the War of 1812 from only the Canadian perspective. The role of government in the economy would also be a major point of debate. Canada has a greater tradition of government intervention in the economy, with crown corporations playing a significant role in sectors like energy and transportation. Would these corporations be privatized in a merger, or would they continue to operate under some form of government control? This would spark intense ideological clashes. Furthermore, the issue of gun control, a significant point of difference between the two countries, would become a national debate. Canada's stricter gun laws would likely face opposition from pro-gun groups in the U.S., leading to heated political battles and potential legal challenges. And what about the monarchy? Canada is a constitutional monarchy, with the British monarch as its head of state. This would obviously change in a merger with the U.S., a republic. The transition would likely involve a symbolic shift, with the former Canadian provinces adopting the U.S. presidential system. But it raises questions about the role of the crown in Canadian history and tradition. The economic integration would be just as complex, with far-reaching consequences. Beyond the initial currency conversion, there would be the challenge of harmonizing tax systems. Canada's Goods and Services Tax, GST, a value-added tax, is different from the U.S. sales tax system. Integrating these systems would be a logistical nightmare, potentially requiring significant changes to business practices and consumer prices. The vast natural resources of Canada would become a major economic asset for the new unified nation, but this would also raise questions about resource management and environmental protection. Canada has a stronger commitment to environmental regulations in some areas, such as carbon pricing. Would these policies be adopted nationwide? Or would they be weakened to align with U.S. standards? The impact on specific industries would vary. Canadian agriculture, for example, might benefit from greater access to the U.S. market, but it could also face increased competition from U.S. producers. The Canadian auto industry, which is closely integrated with the U.S. industry, would likely see further consolidation. The healthcare debate would be particularly intense. Canada's universal healthcare system, funded by taxes and administered by the provinces, is a source of national pride. Many Canadians would be fiercely opposed to any move towards a U.S.-style system, which is largely based on private insurance. This could lead to a major political battle, potentially resulting in a hybrid system that combines elements of both approaches. The idea of Canada becoming the 51st state is, at best, a remote possibility. The obstacles are immense, the political and economic challenges are daunting, and the potential for social and cultural upheaval is significant. But exploring this hypothetical scenario is valuable. It forces us to think about the complexities of national identity, the challenges of merging different political and economic systems, and the potential consequences of redrawing the map of North America. It also highlights the unique relationship between Canada and the U.S., a relationship built on shared values, close economic ties, and a long history of cooperation. Whether or not these two nations ever become one thing is for sure: their destinies are intertwined.